Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Captivating Cases in Rabbinic Responsa, our 6-week journey traveling through the ages, listening in on the surprising practical questions your ancestors asked rabbis across Jewish history. Today we are doing lesson 3, which is titled Precedent in Practice, How Past Rulings Are Applied to New Realities. So this is the third lesson, and it's generously sponsored by Dr. Benjamin Paz, who will be here this evening, and we bless him with much success. May Hashem bless him with much success and happiness in all of his endeavors. So let's just remember where we are here. In the last two lessons, we focused on two different elements of shoot. Okay? We focused on two different elements of shalot chuvot, of the question and answer responsum, this genre of Jewish literature that we've been exploring. In the first week, we focused exclusively on the questioners, those that asked the questions, what it tells us about when they were living, how they were living, who they are, and how important that is for this genre. In lesson number 2, we started to talk about, let's put ourselves into the shoes of a rabbi and see how he would go about answering this particular question that's posed to him. And the first thing we said he needs to do is he needs to get his hands dirty. He needs to get down and dirty. He needs to get down into the trenches, I think the lesson was called, and he needs to figure out the facts on the ground. And if that involves talking to hydration hydrologists to figure out why the Nile River is rising, or if that involves speaking to rocket scientist at JPL to figure out exactly how the orbits of the planets work, or if that involves talking to engineers, naval engineers, electrical engineers, whatever it is, to figure out how different technologies work, then you need to do that before you can answer a question. And then, so far as we were concerned in the last two lessons, we skipped to the answers with each one. We said, okay, this is what the rabbi answered. But of course, we skipped the bulk of the responsum, which is how do they actually go about answering the question. So sometimes, not obviously not in the ones that we're going to be bringing in these lessons, but sometimes the answers to those questions are fairly straightforward. Okay, so if a community member comes to a rabbi and they ask him, Rabbi, my late whatever passed away, my spouse, my parent, my child, whatever it is, child, heaven forbid, am I allowed to work during Shiva? That's a very simple and straightforward answer. The rabbi may or may not know it offhand. He may need to look it up. He may not need to look it up. That just depends on his knowledge, his memory, things like that. Beautiful. But the answer is no. Everybody knows that. There's no argument about it. There's no application of it. You look in the Shulchan Aruch, it says clearly that a person who is sitting Shiva is not allowed to work for the week that they're sitting Shiva. If somebody comes over to a rabbi and says, Rabbi, hey, according to the Torah, am I allowed to get a tattoo? The answer is clearly no. It's not an application process. There's no deep philosophical ideas. It's just no. It says so in the Torah clearly. They can advise the person how to do so. There are things that might even be more sophisticated, but they're still very clearly lifted. If Tova Jane comes to me and says, Rabbi, I just had a wonderful steak dinner and I'd like to have a coffee. Can I have a coffee with almond milk? The answer is very clearly yes, but. Okay, so she's allowed to have her coffee, she's allowed to have it with almond milk, but, and in Shulchan Aruch says this very clearly, she needs to have some almonds on the table so that people see very clearly that this is not real milk, this is almond milk. Or in today's day and age, we would say, have the packaging on the table, right? For those of you that were here this past Shabbos, when we were doing the Q&A with the rabbi, the guest that we had speaking over Shabbos, we did it on Shabbos afternoon, we did a little Q&A with him and some other rabbis, and this question actually came up, and I shared a personal anecdote. I said that I grew up in a household where it was considered the height of I guess it was, I'm trying to think what it was egregious to bring anything to the Shabbos table in its packaging. Even if you were serving a dip of hummus that you bought at Costco, you put it in a nice bowl and you brought it to the table. You don't bring anything in its packaging. And the one exception was by dessert. My mother would bring out the ice cream and the ice cream would be in the container. Why? Even though they sell these nice containers that go on the outside of the pint-sized ice creams to make it all look fancy, etc., for your Shabbos table. But the ice cream actually came unintentionally, so everybody can see this is soy ice cream or almond ice cream or whatever it is, cashew milk ice cream, whatever it is that we have. And the same practice continues in my house. You wouldn't catch any packaging on the table except for the ice cream at the end of a meat dinner. You want to make sure that everybody knows that it's parif. Everybody with me so far? So again, a sophisticated law, but still very clearly in Shulchan Aruch, very clearly dealt with in the Talmud, very clearly dealt with, honestly, some of them even in the Torah itself. And that's why rabbis can answer those questions very clearly. Now, rabbis spend a lot of time answering those questions. But I think it's important to understand that that's not where the lumdus, okay? Lumdus means the genius of a rabbi lies. The genius of a rabbi, usually, and you won't find shut on this. You won't find these responsa on these kind of questions. They're not documenting that. Oh, 25 times in my lifetime, I answered whether you do this before this or this, whether you light Shabbos candles before Hanukkah candles or Hanukkah candles after Shabbos candles. That's the nature of Jews. They're going to forget from year to year, especially an Erev Shabbos. It's more of a rare case. They're going to forget these things. So they're going to come and ask you this. You don't document how many times somebody asks you that question. Where does the genius lie? Where are they documenting them? The hundreds and thousands of responsa that we've been exploring, right? The rabbinic responsa that we've been exploring. What do they deal with? They deal with when somebody asks a question that doesn't seem to be clear in earlier sources. By earlier sources, I mean in the Torah, in the Midrash, in Halacha, in Shulchan Aruch, in the Talmud. In these, there isn't a clear place where you can say, hey, this rabbi who lived 1,500 years ago, who we all love and respect, said exactly what you're supposed to do in this instance. And that can be for two reasons. That can be because the situation is unique, or that can be because something new has changed in this world which has never been applied to yet. Think electricity or something like that, right? So there's an emerging technology. And that is what we are going to be discussing in this lesson. How rabbis will go about not answering their questions based on their own whim, not just looking to their deep Jewish values to answer this question based on the way they feel the Jewish values work, as respectable as that would be. And not answering it based on intuition. Again, as respectable as that would be, because these rabbis were very holy and very God-fearing people. So their intuition presumably would be pretty on target. But still, that's never been the way the rabbis answer questions. The way that they do so is by, you got it, looking for precedent. They will look to the Talmud, and I should clarify something. Hold on. I should clarify something that I clarified with my brother before I got onto the Zoom, just about half an hour ago. My brother's a lawyer in Manhattan, in one of these big, massive law firms, and although he's not in litigation, he clarified these terms for me. In modern legal jargon, there are two terms. There is something called precedent. I assume most of you have heard of this before, and then there is something called analog or analogy. Sometimes a lawyer will argue precedent. Arguing precedent means me and Steve have a disagreement. Whatever the disagreement is, my attorney or Steve's attorney is claiming precedent. What they're claiming is, here is a case, and it's so clearly exactly the same thing that Steve and I are arguing about, so whatever that judge ruled, therefore you should rule the same, especially if the judge that ruled in that case is a very respectable judge, or maybe it's even the Supreme Court, precedent, etc., right? Something along those lines. An analogy is slightly different, and I'm not arguing that it's always clear when it's precedent or analogy. Sometimes lawyers will have it out in court, whether this case and the current case are precedent or it's analogy. Analogy means I believe that the current, meaning or whatever, Tova Jain, let's say, is the judge or the lawyer representing one of us. Tova Jain believes that the argument between Steve and I is close enough to a previous case that we can then extend that precedent to the current case. So it's not an exact copy, an exact precedent, but it's applicable in the same, and sometimes the case is completely different. But the reasoning behind the case, the reason why they argued XYZ in that case should be the same reason why in this case we should argue the same XYZ. Everybody follow what I'm saying? And that's what in at least in modern legal speak, they would call an analogy, not precedent. And that's what we're talking about today. Okay, now this is where things start to get very, iffy. Who decides the rabbi could do this? And this is where you will have lengthy responsa that are arguing why that can be done. And today we're going to be doing some examples of this. But before we do so, as with everything, we need to understand where this begins. Who was the first rabbi to engage in this kind of comparative work? Anybody want to guess?
Moses?
Very good. It's always a good idea to go to the first rabbi. Moshe Rabbeinu himself. Moses uses this kind of comparative logic, if you will. When Moshe Rabbeinu descended from Mount Sinai carrying 2 tablets, Moshe was met with a very shocking sight, right? He sees the Jewish people serving the golden calf, and he takes the 2 tablets, he shatters them from his hands, according to, who is it? Is it Mel Gibson? Who's Who does the comedy where he has three of them and he drops them and he says, "I give you this."
Mel Brooks.
Mel Brooks. No, I don't know why I'm thinking Mel Gibson. Big difference between Mel Gibson and Mel Brooks.
God forbid Mel Gibson.
I was going to say, now that I think about it, big difference between Mel Gibson and Mel Brooks. But Mel Brooks has that comment. Anyways, so what is that based on? That's based on an actual story in the Torah, where Moshe Rabbeinu takes the two tablets, he shatters them on the ground, and that is the end of that story. Now, what gives Moshe Rabbeinu the right to shatter the tablets? They weren't his. They were God's. God was giving them to the Jewish people. So Moshe Rabbeinu sees them serving the idols, therefore he decides it's his right to shatter the tablets. Right? In fact, picture the moment. Moshe is standing at the foot of the mountain, his eyes widening as he sees the Jewish people serving the golden calf. It's an unprecedented and unexpected situation. Even if he was looking to the Torah for advice, how could he possibly find any advice in the Torah for a situation that had never happened before? Right? The Talmud teaches that Moshe engaged in a form of legal reasoning, drawing a comparison between this new reality and a reality that had already existed, a law that was already inscribed in the Torah and taught by God. Tova Jane, can you read it for us, please? It's on page 103, text 1. This is in the Talmud.
Can I make my guess? Okay, what page are we on?
No, don't make a guess. It's okay. The Talmud tractate.
Okay, I'm not allowed to. All right. Okay, what page?
It's just going to take too long. There will be opportunities to guess other things later as we go along.
All right. What page am I on?
103.
But for now, page 103, text 1, Moses' thought process.
Okay, hold on. Okay. What reasoning did Moses apply to break the tablets? He said, I was explicitly told that an idol worshiper may not eat from the Paschal lamb, which is only one of the 613 mitzvot. If so, now that Israel has worshipped the golden calf, they are certainly unworthy of receiving all 613 mitzvot.
So a little bit of background. I think most of you are familiar with this, but just in case, and especially for the sake of those that may be watching this video or taking this course later in the future, the Pesach offering, as many of you know, was part of the Passover Seder back in Temple times. So today we don't have a Pesach offering, but back in Temple times they would have sat down to their Seder, and when they were having the Afikoman, they wouldn't just be having matzah, they would also be having lamb chops, right? Because they would have brought a Pesach offering of a lamb, and then they'd be eating that together. However, and this was done in groups. You know, Jews together, a whole bunch of Jews together, neighbors, friends, whatever, family, all get together, and they would because no matter how hungry you are, it's not true that you can eat a whole cow, and you can't even eat a whole lamb. So they would do it all together, a whole group together. Beautiful. Now, somebody who serves idols is not considered worthy of taking part in the Pesach offering. This makes a lot of sense. He's denying God, right? So therefore, he's not worthy of being part of it. So Moshe Rabbeinu just uses that as an analog. If one who worships idols cannot observe one mitzvah, so for sure he cannot get all the mitzvot, which is what the tablets were, boom, he shatters the tablets. But here's the real kicker. The real kicker is that God approved. In the Torah, Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Yasher kochacha sheshibarta, thank you for breaking them. That was the right approach. Very similar to what we discussed last week. Remember what we discussed last week? That if a judge comes, if a rabbi tries to approach a particular question with the right attitude and with the right fear of heaven and the right, his head in the right place, v'Hashem imo, God is with him, and God will steer him in the right direction. Similarly, Hashem approved of what Moshe Rabbeinu did by destroying the tablets. And ever since Moshe Rabbeinu, rabbis throughout the generations have been attempting to put on that same precedent hat, that same analog hat, and figure out the answer to current questions based on questions that have already been dealt with. And that might be clearer in the Torah to figure out, can we apply that same logic to our current scenario? Can we apply that same halacha to the current technology or to the current case or whatever it is? And so this is today's lesson. We are going to start off with our first case, which is going to be a blood libel. We are going to see how a rabbi used precedent to deal with certain intricacies of the blood libels. Baruch Hashem, that's one part of anti-Semitism that at least it seems like we have put to bed. Case number 2 is going to be called the synagogue seat speculator. Do we have any? Vicky Belmont is not on this Zoom. Do we have any Wall Street finance people here on the Zoom? I don't think so, right? Anybody that's ever been a speculator on the markets? That's played
I play the market all the time.
But sometimes as a speculator, kind of trying to short.
Oh no, I don't do shorting. I don't even understand that.
Right. Okay. So we're going to learn about somebody who did this with a shul, and we'll talk soon about it. Case number 3 is going to be about an astrolabe. Does anybody know what an astrolabe is?
It's used on ships to measure the horizon or something.
Close enough. That might be the current usage of it. I had no idea what an astrolabe was. It was what they used as a watch in ancient times. We'll learn all about it. And then case number 4 is going to be about a hot air balloon. And then we're going to have a conversation about new and emerging technologies, not current new and emerging technologies, but how, that's lesson 6. But for now, emerging technologies in their local times. And finally, we'll walk away with a Hasidic perspective that can teach us a lesson about all of this business of trying to apply past precedent to current cases. All right, you guys ready? Let's do it. Let's start off with the case of a blood libel. We are going to turn our attention to the video screens, and after we do so, I'll pick it up from where the video leaves off.
In the spring of 1475, the city of Trent in northern Italy became the site of a tragedy. The body of 2-year-old Simon was found in a canal beneath the home of a Jewish family. Within days, all 18 Jewish men of the city were arrested. Under torture, they confessed to murdering the boy to use his blood in a Jewish ritual, an accusation with no basis in Jewish law or practice. All 18 were sentenced to death. The Jewish community of Trent was effectively erased. But the story didn't end there. A year later, in 1476, Bishop Heinrich of Regensburg passed through Trent on his way home from Rome. He learned that one of the tortured men had named Jews in Regensburg, accusing them of committing a similar crime nearly a decade earlier. Heinrich brought the confessions back to Regensburg. In the spring of 1476, the city arrested 17 of its most prominent Jews. Their families were placed under house arrest. Jewish assets across the city were frozen, and the torture began again. Some of the accused resisted. Others broke under pressure. The resulting confessions were contradictory and confused. Dates didn't line up. Locations varied widely. Yet the authorities pressed on. They needed physical proof. So on April 22nd, 1476, the cellar of one of the accused was excavated. After 3 days, bones were discovered, said to be the remains of 4 children. But doubts quickly surfaced. Ronnie Pochashar, in The Myth of Ritual Murder, writes, according to a legal brief in defense of the 17 Jews and presented at the imperial court, the excavation was not supervised by disinterested parties. Soldiers and authorities were not called in until the 3rd day, and one soldier actually expressed his distrust of the workers entrusted with the digging. Some thought the bones had been planted to frame the Jews. Men were seen removing bones from the Christian cemetery. At the imperial court in Vienna, Emperor Frederick III ordered the Jews' release. Regensburg officials resisted, asserting their city's autonomy for criminal cases. A tense standoff dragged on until May 1478, when a compromise was reached. The prisoners would be freed, but only after paying an exorbitant sum, 10,000 florins to the emperor, 5,000 to the city for the trial and prison costs, 8,000 more to cover a fine the emperor had levied against the city for their disobedience in this case. In total, 23,000 florins, an impossible sum. Though Jews across the region gave generously, it wasn't enough. The prisoners remained locked away. German rabbis convened in Nuremberg. Should they impose a tax on every Jewish community in the empire to free the Jews of Regensburg? How far could they go to buy justice?
So We are going to be skipping text 2 and 3, which the video pretty much covered. That's the background for this story. Essentially, where we've landed is that during the Middle Ages, Jewish communities who enjoyed some degree of legal autonomy, they would tax their members for various communal needs. Does anybody remember in lesson 1, right? We had this whole conversation about same idea. The problem is there was no federal authority over all the Jews in the Holy Roman Empire, right? So and therefore there wasn't really an entity that had the power to issue this tax over the entire Holy Roman Empire that everybody should do this on behalf of other Jews. They could try and make it voluntary, but we all know the difference between voluntary or an imposed tax, right? Also, they had a different issue, which is nobody could recall any instance where one city of the region was taxed for another city's benefit. In other words, Regensburg should have to deal with Regensburg, right? And Nuremberg should have to deal with Nuremberg. And all of a sudden you lump them all into one and you're making them all... There didn't seem to be precedent for anything like that. Also, nobody was sure if it could even be argued that they would be obligated to contribute to this cause as a legitimate tax. They might have lived hundreds of miles away from each other. There's a significant difference between a charity and a tax. A charity is you saying poor people are exempt from the charity. They're not. Nobody is required to sell their personal belongings in order to pay it. Nobody's required to avoid going on vacation this year to help out with it, etc. So there's a very big difference between a charity and a tax. Charity you could always do, right? It's a wonderful cause. They could have sent messengers out to all the cities and try and collect charity. But also a charity would bring in a lot less, obviously, than a tax, right? So the question on the table became, hold on, and this question landed on the desk of Rabbi Yosef Kolon. Hold on one second, here we go. So the question on the table became, 70 Jewish men were falsely charged with murder. Freeing them would come at an exorbitant cost, and the rabbis were inclined to impose a tax on other Jewish communities in the Holy Roman Empire, but they were unsure of the legitimacy of the tax. They reached out for guidance, and they arrived at the desk of Rabbi Yosef Kolon. Rabbi Yosef Kolon was known as the Maharik. Okay, now these rabbis get their nicknames from acronyms for their names. So the Maharik would stand for Morenu Harav, our teacher rabbi. And then it would be his name, Yosef Kolon, in this instance. Yod Kuf would stand for Yosef Kolon. What's the question they posed to him? Can all Jews in the Holy Roman Empire be taxed to fund the release of the Jews in Regensburg, who in theory are all on their own? Right? In theory, it's their issue. Now, the Maharik lived in Pavia, which was it would seem in the Duchy of Milan, and they asked this question. All right, so 1470s, this is the question on the table. Anybody want to try to take a stab at it? Tova Jane, you wanted to guess a little bit. What would you think?
No, I don't. I'm sort of looking at the examples and vaguely remembering this from Talmud study.
Oh, you're already on page 107. You're jumping ahead.
Yeah, I am. So
that's okay. So
yes,
that's okay.
I was thinking of something else guessing.
Okay. So on page 107, what's going on, and this is where Tova Jane is taking us now. I think that this is a great place to go. Rabbi Yosef Kolon, the Maharik, essentially did not know the answer. Now, when a rabbi doesn't know the answer, this is what the topic of today's lesson is. He looks for precedent. So the Maharik looks to the Talmud, and he starts to craft an answer or a tshuva based on, and he most likely, by the way, remember this is before Google and before Sefaria and before being able to search through all these books together, and before today it's known as Otzar HaChachma, which is like a database of like any Jewish religious works that have ever been published over the centuries and whatever, before libraries and indexes and all concordances and all these things are out. So he most likely had an encyclopedic knowledge of the Talmud, and he in his mind he feels that there's a parallel to a particular case from the Talmud, which is going to be and again, it's not precedent; it's going to be analog. It's going to be a different instance, but he feels that the logic can be transplanted, can be applied. All right, so let's try it, shall we? The precedent that he applies is river blockage. Okay, we're soon going to see that there's a case of river blockage, and there's a case there's a case of a river being obstructed, or of a drain being obstructed. Okay, let's start with case number 1 on page 107. Steve, can you read it for us, please? Just the case, please.
Okay. A river flows through multiple communities. Over time, sedimentation causes reduced downstream flow. Who is responsible for the sediment removal?
Okay, so why are we removing the sediment? Because everybody wants water. Why does everybody want water? Presumably to bathe in, to drink, to water their fields, their crops, etc. Beautiful. It's affecting 3 different communities. Yes? On your screen, you can see case 1. There's an illustration. There's community A, which is at the top of the hill. The river presumably is flowing downstream. And then the black there is the sedimentation, right? So there's the sedimentation build up, and it's causing the river flow to be, I mean, it's probably still powerful at the top, but community B is the most upset because they see the sedimentation, they see it stopping right there. But even community C, they might not know why the river is slowing down. Maybe not everyone knows, and it's not as clear, but the reason is also because of that sedimentation. Now, the sedimentation has to be removed. So we're going to hire a removal company that's going to go down, maybe scuba divers or whatever it is, right? Or construction company, whatever, and they're going to go and they're going to clear out the sedimentation. But it's going to cost a hefty sum. Who has to pay for it? You can see this going 3 ways. Either the first answer, again, we're on page 107, all the communities along the river have to chip in equally. So if it's going to cost $1,000, each one has to give 333, yada, yada, yada. Or only those downstream of the blockage have to pay for it. So $500 from community B and $500 from community C, because actually community A is not being affected at all. Or maybe only those upstream of the blockage need to pay for it. For whatever reason, maybe only they need to pay for it. Right? Okay. That is case number 1. Let's go to case number 2. Turn to page 108. Case number 2 is different story. This is the obstructed drainage canal. Elise, can you read the case for us? We're on page 108, exercise 3.2, case 2.
Okay. Maybe.
Do you see it?
It seems to be in Hebrew. Okay.
No. Page
Reb
1.
Yehuda taught.
No. You're in the wrong place.
Oh, I see. A drainage canal that moves water from roads serves multiple communities on a hillside. The canal becomes clogged, preventing water from draining. Who is responsible for clearing the blockage? All communities.
Okay, so hold on 1 second. This instance is very different. Case number 2 is very different. Same 3 communities, right? But instead of it being a sedimentation issue, it's actually a drainage issue. So now they don't want the water because the water there's a drain that makes sure that the water never overflows. And if it overflows, what would happen? It would ruin their roads. And in this instance, it's right below community B. So here are the options. Either all the communities that rely on the drainage canal, which really is all 3 communities, right? Because they all need it to one degree or another. So they all need a chip in for it. Again, $333 to pay for the maintenance, or only those downhill below the blockage have to pay for it for whatever reason, or maybe only those uphill above the blockage A and B. Those are the people that are suffering seemingly most, right? Because if the drainage is not working, below the drain might not be as big of an issue, but above the drain is where all the flooding is going to happen, right? Okay, let's see what the Talmud says about this. We're going to learn the Talmudic statement and then right away the Rashi. So Ron, if you can read them both for us, please. We're on page 109. Start with text 4a. Talmudic water statutes.
Rab Yehuda taught, concerning the digging of a river, the lower ones must assist the upper ones, but the upper ones need not assist the lower ones. The reverse is true regarding draining rainwater.
Now, obviously, this is very, very concise. So Rashi unpacks this for us. Go ahead, Ron. Text 4b. Explanation.
When those upstream repair the obstruction in the river that's adjacent to their community, the downstream communities are obligated to assist them, since a blockage upstream prevents water from flowing toward them. Thus, fixing the upper section benefits those downstream. But the upper ones need not assist the lower ones when repairs are made downstream, because these do not benefit those upstream. In fact, the repairs below harm those upstream. The more water that rushes forward, the less water is available upstream, which risks their fields drying out. The reverse is true regarding draining rainwater. This applies to a city where excessive rainwater causes mud buildup and road damage. So a drainage channel is built to divert water outside the city. If a blockage occurs in the section belonging to the lower residence, requiring it to be dug out, those upstream must assist in clearing it. Because as long as the lower section remains clogged, water will accumulate and flood the upper areas. However, the lower ones have no obligation to assist the upper ones in clearing drain blockages in the higher area, because the residents below favor that the upper water does not drain to the lower area.
Thank you, Ron. This is where I want to pause and discuss. Okay, precisely because we're completely out of context now. That's why I want to pause and discuss. Rabbi Yosef Kolon has been approached with an issue of who should pay, or not even who should pay. Are we allowed to tax the entire Jewish community of the Holy Roman Empire in order to help one community of Regensburg? And he's busy analyzing a section in Tractate Bav Metzia of the Talmud about waters and floodwaters and drainages and sedimentation. And right about now, you're thinking, what on earth? Dude, you have a real life or death situation in front of you. What are you doing studying about drainage and flooding and sedimentation and maintenance work, and who has to pay for it? Right? Here is where the key factor comes in. And this is why he builds it out of both cases and not out of one of them. In each of these cases, the Talmud rules that somebody else is responsible to pay for it. Who is responsible to pay for it? Only those that are going to be affected by the issue. That's the underlying principle of this Gemara. So in each instance, even though it's the same river and the same three communities, because the scenario is different, whether we're talking about sedimentation or drainage, therefore the Talmud will say that it's a different two communities that are obligated. In the case of the sedimentation, they will argue anybody downstream from the sedimentation, which means those that will stand to lose from the sedimentation, those are the ones that are responsible to pay for the sedimentation removal. And in the case of the drainage, only the communities that are upstream are required to pay for the drainage unclogging. Why? Because they are the ones that will benefit from that. In both instances, the other community, either in case 1A, community A, or in case 2, community C, they will not be benefiting from this work, and therefore they do not need to chip in. Okay? And this is what Rabbi Yosef Kolon sees. He says he sees three different communities, and the Talmud seems to be, the underlying principle of the Gemara seems to be that that a community pays for what they need and for what they use. Okay? And now he's going to try and apply that to the case of the Jews of Regensburg and the tax that they would like imposed on all of the Jews of the Holy Roman Empire. Steve, do you want to try and apply it for us? How do you think, how might this Talmudic passage apply to the question of funding the release in Regensburg?
Wait a second. What's the precedent?
Again, the underlying principle we're basing on is the Talmud seems to always say the only people who need to pay for something is those who will benefit from it, but
Yes.
not anyone else.
Well, a piece of information missing.
What's the piece of information missing?
Who caused the clogging? Who caused that? And it should be their responsibility.
I understand that if you were going based on your own logic, you might want to know that, but the Talmud doesn't seem to be concerned about that. Let's assume it's natural. It's a natural buildup of sedimentation, or the drain just got clogged by fish that slowly go through the whatever it is. Yeah, it doesn't make a difference.
All three should pay because
again, hold on, Steve. We're not looking for a ruling in the case of the Talmud. The Talmud already gave us the ruling. The Talmud tells us only two of the communities need to pay in both instances.
I see.
Who needs to pay? Only those that will benefit from the repair. How do you think this can apply to the Jews of Regensburg?
Then you have the B and C, the
There's
middle
no
one.
B and C with the Jews of Regensburg. It's either the Jews of Regensburg should pay for it, and you cannot impose a tax all across the Holy Roman Empire, or everybody should be involved.
Well, that's what I said first. That everybody should be involved.
Now I'm asking you, of those two, who do you think should pay for it? And how do you see that analog here?
I'm not getting the question.
That's okay. Anybody else want to jump in here?
Well, you have to figure out what is the benefit and who would benefit. I mean, obviously the people that are released would benefit, but then the question is, what's the effect on the neighboring communities? So you have these crummy priests running around causing trouble. Do they just run around within 50 miles of each other, or they travel all over the place causing trouble? So and you could look at it, whole variety of ways. But
So
who's
at
benefiting?
first glance, so this is exactly, so Tova Jane is starting to reference lesson 2. She's saying, I don't know all the facts on the grounds of who is in danger based on this blood libel. But for now, at first glance, it would seem like from this Talmudic passage, Rabbi Yosef Kolon would say, who's in danger? The Jews of Regensburg. So who should pay to have the danger removed? The Jews of Regensburg, right? That would be a very reasonable takeaway from our Gemara. Yet, before we settle on this, we have to read a very important fact about the reality of the time, right? Just like we discussed last week in lesson 2. It's not enough for the Maharik just to look at the Talmud and say, all right, who's being affected? Jews of Regensburg. He also needs to be a man of the world. He needs to get down into the trenches. He needs to know how anti-Semitism works. And in those days, anti-Semitism was blood libels, and we'll soon learn about another one. I'll wait to introduce it. So for now, Tova Jane, if you can read for us, please, text 5a, a wider threat.
Okay. It is well known and widely recognized that the imprisonment of our brethren from the holy community of Regensburg, may their rock protect and strengthen them, is an event that poses potential harm and danger not only in Regensburg, but its surrounding areas, but not only to Regensburg and its surrounding areas, but to many other communities as well. The rabbis who have gathered at Nuremberg to save those wrongly sentenced to death emphasize this point in their letter to me.
Says the Maharik.
Should I keep on going? You want me to keep on going?
No, not yet. Says the Maharik, I want to start off by stating a fundamental historical fact that the Jews of Regensburg are not facing this threat alone. If the Jews of Regensburg remained imprisoned, or worse, if they were executed, it would validate the blood libel accusation. And if it validates it, then what happens is there's a domino effect to all of the communities in the surrounding area. That's his point. And given this new reality, we're going to see that he's going to obligate all of the other communities to be involved in helping and paying for this. Elise, Steve, if you can pick this up, text 5b, the application, page 114. You're going to see how he's going to apply this to everyone else as well.
In my humble opinion, any Jewish community that is reasonably at risk and would almost certainly face the same fate, God forbid, if this matter is not properly addressed. These communities must take part in the financial burden. Saving the holy community of Regensburg ultimately means saving themselves as well, while the opposite outcome in Regensburg would bring dire consequences to them, heaven forbid. Even though at this moment the libel is directed only at Regensburg and not at other locations, still, because the calamity would inevitably spread to them as well, they are judged based on what is bound to occur, obligating them to contribute to the expenses of saving the holy community of Regensburg. May their rock protect and strengthen them. Evidence, in my opinion, can be found in the Talmud, tractate Bava Metzia, which obligates those living higher up to assist those below in repairing a drainage channel to direct water out of the city. The reasoning is that if the lower waters do not flow out, the upper waters will remain trapped in the higher areas. It's obvious that when water is blocked at the bottom of a channel, it does not immediately impact the higher portion of the channel. Rather, the water gradually rises until it affects the upper area. Nevertheless, because the damage will eventually reach the upper area, there is no distinction between earlier and later, and the people higher up are required to assist them. The same applies here. Even though the immediate harm and danger is currently befalling the holy community of Regensburg, it is well known that the others are also at risk, heaven forbid. They are therefore obliged to assist them, as I have explained.
All right. So it's true that a person is only obligated to pay for what they need and what they use, but the Jews throughout the Holy Roman Empire will also be affected by this, and therefore he wants to obligate all of them. Okay. He now needs to deal with one other issue. What is that? There is a concept in the Talmud called Bari Hazeka. For those of you that have studied Talmud, you may be familiar with this. What does Bari Hazeka mean? Bari Hazeka means that something is surely coming. There is a difference between a damage or an implication or an effect that a person is going to have immediately or potential. In the future, there might potentially be something, right? Me doing something which causes immediate damage to Steve or to Steve's property makes me obligated to pay Steve for that. But me doing something which then means that there's a likelihood, statistics, people like to play today everything's statistics. If I do something which raises the statistics of Steve's property being damaged, that's different. That I might not be obligated for that, right? So the next issue that the Maharik is going to deal with is this issue of Bari Hazeka. What about Bari Hazeka? This case doesn't seem like for sure the Jews in the other communities are going to be affected. It's a potential, and maybe you even raise the likelihood very high. But is it really certainly going to come and going to be an issue for them, so much so that you can tax them now to pay for it? Or, to put it in the words of the slide, how does the Talmud's case of inevitable harm apply to the possibility of a blood libel? Is a blood libel inevitable harm? Or is it potential harm that maybe you raise the stakes on? Let's see how he deals with this. Elise, if you can read for us, please, text 5C. We're on page 116.
Okay. One might attempt to distinguish and argue that in the Talmudic case, the obligation for those to assist, those higher up to assist, is because the eventual damage to them is inevitable. However, here one might say that the spread of this false and slanderous accusation to other places is uncertain, but in truth we see sadly there's a focused conspiracy to attack and incite against us. May God in his abundant mercy save us from their hands. In such a situation, the harm is considered to be certain, and in such cases it is said, praise is the person who is always vigilant.
Maharik clarifies that it's concerned about other places isn't a matter of excessive caution for a minimal risk. He says no. The danger is so great that from a legal perspective, it's as good as certain. It already is Bari Hazeka. If you take a look at the map on page 117, you can see what he's talking about. Okay, the map on page 117 is accompanied by dates, okay, or years, at least in this instance. Years and cities, very crucial to see, and you can almost see it spreading, this business with the blood libels. It starts in one place. When they see the success in one place, it moves to another case. Now, I do need to clarify one term here. You see two terms here. One most of you are most likely familiar with, and the other one that most of you are most likely not familiar with. A blood libel, everybody knows, right, is when Christians would accuse Jews of murdering a Christian child and taking his blood and mixing it into the matzah. Obviously ludicrous. We all know that a Jew is not only is not obligated to put Christian blood in the matzah, but is actually prohibited from eating any blood, not just of a non-Jew, but even of a Jew and even of an animal. We're prohibited from eating any blood. The only blood that a Jew is permitted to eat is, anybody? This is like a fun fact. Trivia fact. Your own blood, if it is already in your mouth, if it's from your mouth and in your mouth already. So you have no obligation. If you split your lip, or maybe not your lip, maybe your lip, yes, you would have an obligation. But if you, have a tooth, brushing your teeth and there's blood coming out, you have no obligation to completely rinse it out and get rid of it. I do that anyways because I feel it's quite gross. But in theory, I'm fine to keep going as long as the blood doesn't leave my mouth. If the blood leaves my mouth, then I'm no longer allowed to eat that blood. Right? So for example, the classic cut yourself and go, right? People do that. You're not allowed to do that. A Jew is not allowed to do that. You have to wipe it off and whatever. That's fine. Beautiful. So that is...
Rabbi, what if you're bit by a snake? Isn't there actually something in other words, sometimes when you're bit by a snake, you suck
There's
out
a
the
whole
venom.
business with venom. Listen, if it's
Venom.
obviously if your life is
It's
dependent
not
on it,
blood,
that's
it's
fine.
venom.
Yeah,
Really?
first of all, that's about venom, not blood. But I'll give you a simpler case. If somehow your life is dependent on you sucking your own blood, and this is such a gross conversation, but if you have to become a vampire for a day, then listen, it's not one of the three big violations. So if your life is dependent on it, then obviously you're allowed to do it. But we're really getting distracted here.
I'm
Let's
just
get
being obnoxious.
back on track.
Also, you're
What?
not swallowing the venom; you're spitting it out.
Right. Yeah, that's also true. Okay.
What about the thing at the bris that they do with
Oh,
the
Right,
that's
venom?
yeah.
right.
Yeah. Okay. They're not
Oh,
swallowing.
yeah, but what
Oh,
Rabbi
that's right.
Elise
Yeah,
is
yeah.
right. I thought that with
They're not swallowing it. Trust me, that's gross.
Don't ask.
No, they're not swallowing it. Okay. But this is really off topic because I was just really explaining something that I think you're all familiar with, which is a blood libel. But you'll notice another one here on this list, which is called accusation of host desecration. Do you see that? You can see it in Regensburg in 1475. You can see it again in Passau of 1478. You would see it again in Nuremberg in 1478. This accusation of host desecration. Anybody know what that was?
eating the wafers, the wafers that they use
Close. Very close.
for when they do communion.
Yeah. No, but
So
what's
eating it or stealing it or doing something.
yeah, very good. Okay, so in Christianity, the host is the bread used in their religious service, symbolizing the body of the Christian founder. The word comes from the Latin word hostia, meaning sacrificial victim. The accusation of host desecration against Jews was a widespread and malicious charge during the Middle Ages. It claimed that Jews would steal the bread from Christian churches in order to desecrate it and harm what it represented. This charge, like the blood libel, feud, violent persecution, and the rest already you can use your imagination. Right? Now, but let's pay attention to how this spreads across the map. Look where Endingen is on the map. Yes? That's the first blood libel in 1470. 3 Jews are executed and all Jewish families are expelled. Shortly afterwards, in 1470, Forsheim, which is literally right next to Endingen, also somehow, by divine providence, some sort of coincidence, also has a blood libel and 4 Jews are executed. And shortly later, in 1470, Frankfurt, which is right on top of Endingen, it's almost like you could see it spreading across the map. It starts in one city and then it goes to the next 2 cities. Then to Regensburg in 1474, 1475, then to Trent, which I think these are the ones we've been reading about, and then to Regensburg in 1476. That's when the 70 Jews were arrested for many months, and that's the case we're dealing with here, right? Now, the point that we're trying to make is that the Maharik is recognizing a very dangerous trend that blood libels and claims of host desecration were spreading rapidly, right? We see this today, by the way, right? An idea is hard to get rid of. We see this today with terrorism and terrorist attacks or terrorist attacks against Jews or mass shootings in schools. You see it. It starts in one and then it spreads from one to another. Whether they're copycats or they're being inspired by them or they couldn't think of the idea and then they thought of the idea, which is why, by the way, it's interesting to me that the U.S. has never gotten on board with what Israel has gotten on board with. In Israel, almost none of the videos and the propaganda that Hamas puts out of hostages gets published in the news media. The news media themselves have made an oath and made a pact not to release propaganda that Hamas releases in order to terrorize people. They don't want to give a voice to terrorism. And yet it boggles my mind that every time there's a mass shooter here in the United States, they are given days and days of airtime on television. What does that lead to? That leads to millions of people being exposed to it, including certain people who may be mentally deranged or morally deranged or whatever it is. And then that leads to the next one and to the next one and to the next one. Now, I'm not here to cure the United States of school shootings, and I'm not claiming that I know the answer, but certainly part of it is a social phenomena that spreads. And that's what the Maharik is noticing. And by the way, the Maharik was right. Okay? Marik's sociological and political analysis proved correct. Although the 1470s, as we just saw on the map, saw numerous blood accusations against Jews, as far as we can tell, not a single additional case arose during the remainder of this emperor, the one that was in the video, Emperor Friedrich III's reign, until he died in 1493. There was not a single additional case during that time. And I don't know that we can for sure say that it was directly related to the Maharik's psak din here, to his ruling here, but definitely it had a part in it. What did he say? He rules that it's an obligation to contribute and not as a charity. The entire Jewish community of the Holy Roman Empire needs to contribute as a tax. That is subsequently what happened. Jews all around the Holy Roman Empire gave their money as an obligation, and I'm sure some of them had to forego their vacations or maybe even eat a little bit less that week in order to give that tax. They redeemed these 17 Jews. Sure, was it totally unright and unjust that the Jews had to pay these 23,000, I forget the currency, whatever it was? Sure. But the fact is they paid it, and because they paid it, it became clear to everyone that these Jews were exonerated and that the blood libel was not true and was fabricated by the people who brought it against the Jews. And from that, you were able to start putting a stop to the spread of these libels because people saw that they weren't necessarily successful. My point is that you have here a rabbi who's being a very well-known rabbi, a very well-respected rabbi, short, beautiful. But what he's being presented with is totally unprecedented. But he finds an obscure, I don't know if it's obscure, but he finds a case in the Talmud that he can parallel this to, that he can draw logic from. And once he does that, he's able to rule confidently based on the Torah, what the Torah wants us to do in this situation, and we see the results of it. And to me, I thought this whole episode was a beautiful example of what it means to use precedent in practice. Okay, let's do another one, shall we? Page 119, the synagogue seat speculator. Okay, we are going to turn to another case, another rabbi. This time it's Rav Yitzchak bar Sheshes. Another era. Rav Yitzchak bar Sheshes was known as the Rivash. He was a prominent 14th century authority. So this is the 1300s from Valencia, Spain. And he receives a query from a fellow rabbi in a nearby city, which is known as Zatvia, spelled with an X. Before we read it, I need to give you one piece of background, okay? And that piece of background is that shuls in medieval Spain were very different, first of all, than shuls at the same time in Germany and Ashkenazi communities. We see this clearly in all the literature of the time, that shuls there treated their seats very differently than shuls in Spain treated their seats, but also very different, most likely, than most of us are used to today. Today, if you walk into your average shul, most likely, nobody owns any seats in the shul. You can go and you can sit down in any seat and you're fine, you're good to go. Now, that doesn't mean the seats aren't reserved. That doesn't mean there isn't even people maybe paying to reserve a seat. That's all fine and dandy, but they aren't treated as a piece of real estate. So if you come to the Chabad of Pasadena, for example, even reserved there isn't really. I mean, people have their regular seats that they sit in, but if somebody else sits there, they just move on to the next seat. If you go to synagogues maybe that are a little bit more established, they'll have, especially on the high holidays, they'll have reserved seating. So there'll be seats that are reserved, and maybe even better areas of the shul, and worse, further up to the front and the back, and they'll have somebody's name put on it. But that doesn't mean that the person owns that seat. It just means they reserved it by paying for it this year with their membership. Right? Now, there are some shuls, like for example, I think the Chabad in Aventura, which I'm close with quite a few people from the Chabad in Aventura. The Chabad in Aventura is basically a transplant community from Venezuela. And we should say, by the way, that the Venezuelan community is a transplant community from Spain. So maybe this actually traces its roots all the way to there. But in the Chabad in Aventura, if you walk in, there are plaques, built-in plaques on the seats in the shul. This seat belongs to Steve Muller. And the way that works is that when they built the shul to begin with, they sold the seats. Okay, now
Condominiums, sure.
Like condominiums, yeah. Now in Aventura, the way it works is you don't pay that much. You pay, and then your seat is reserved for you, and you can continue to purchase that seat so long as you continue to pay membership to the shul. So it's not even the same as here. That's maybe the same as the way it was in Ashkenazi communities back in the 1300s. In Ashkenazi communities, the way it worked was you can even inherit your seat from your father and from your grandfather, but the inheritance wasn't because it was a piece of property being transferred down. Rather, it was the ability to sit there. Whatever. It seems like, and that's why I'm making this clear now, it seems like in medieval Spain, it was actually treated like a piece of property. When they would build the shul, the way that they would build the shul is, imagine I came to you guys right here on the Zoom. I say, Steve, I want to build a shul in Pasadena. Tavajay, I want to build a seat in Pasadena. Can you pay $300,000? What you're purchasing is a seat forever. you're going to own this seat in the shul. Okay? Now, it's a brilliant fundraising tactic, by the way, because first of all, you're going to get the money you need to build a shul. Second of all, you're going to get committed congregants, because trust me, if you paid $300,000 for that seat, you're going to use it as often as possible, right? We all know this with the timeshares, right? They make you pay for it, and then, of course, you want to try to go and use it, right? Okay. Now, in this particular instance, there was a seat speculator. What does that mean? Anybody know how speculators play the market?
Yeah, they'll buy things that they, in order to sell them.
Not just in order to sell them, but also in order to drive the price up to create the market to sell them, right? Okay, yeah, I know a guy who does this with Dodger seats, by the way. He buys memberships of what's it called? Not memberships. He buys season passes, but with the intention of reselling all the tickets instead throughout the season, right? Okay, and he's hoping that enough of the games, the price will be more expensive, so he'll be able to resell them. Okay, beautiful, whatever. This whole thing exists. By the way, it exists with the Super Bowl coming up, right? People buy tickets and they resell them. Some of it is illegal, some of it is legal, whatever. Let's see what this guy did. A rich man, and he decides to speculate on this shul. Steve, if you can read for us, please, text 6, profit versus access.
Okay. Question to...
Rav Yitzchak Bar Sheshet.
Okay. Question. A community has a synagogue in their city. A wealthy man from the city purchased many seats there at a low price. Due to his actions, the value of the seats increased. As the price rose, he raised the rental fees to the point that renters were deterred from attending the synagogue because of the high cost of seating. The community wanted to add more seats in available spaces within the synagogue and sell those seats to various people. This would benefit the community financially and also encourage more people to attend the synagogue using the newly added seats. However, the wealthy man objected, arguing that the new seats would restrict access to his seats, even if there would still be sufficient space to pass through. The passage would be narrower than before. You asked whether the wealthy man is justified in his claim.
You see why they're calling it the synagogue seat speculator?
But he should probably do is run for president. This
guy, yeah. He definitely seems to be good at taking advantage. Anyways, listen, the guy is a jerk. There's no question about it. But having said that, to view things a little bit from his perspective, it is possible that the shul, it is most likely, not just possible, it is most likely that the shul originally was having a hard time selling the seats. Okay? Maybe they were in the wrong neighborhood of town. There weren't a lot of people moving to that side of town. They decided to build a shul, but now as they're building the shul, they're realizing they're running out of funds. They start selling the seats. There's not enough people to buy the seats. This one wealthy man says, you know what? I'll do a favor to the shul, maybe it was even a favor. He says, I'm going to start buying out the seats. Now, to his luck, his buying out the seats played the market. So what happens? All of a sudden, there's no more seats to be bought. The price is going up. And now he's renting his seats. And he's like, oh my God, what an unbelievable position I'm in now. I'm renting the seats. He's raising his rent for the seats. It's like the housing market, you know? He raises his rent for the seats. And now people are renting seats from him. The problem is now people are like, he raised the rent for the seats too high and he's got a monopoly of the market. I guess there were no antitrust laws with regards to buying too many seats in the shul. Anyways, so here's what, this is the scenario. This is what's going on. So the shul comes up with a brilliant plan. We have this guy. What are we going to do? We need to reverse the whole process, right? We need to get involved. It's like the U.S. government getting involved in the housing market. Let's lower the interest rates. We're going to raise the interest rates. We're trying to play it, right? The problem when you try to play the market, you always mess things up. So what did they do? They said, all right, the prices are going too high. Let's add more seats. Let's say there were 100 seats in the shul, right? And they were nice, spacious seats, each seat with 6 feet in between it, whatever it is. They're like, all right, we're adding in another aisle in between each one. We're going to add more seats. What's the effect that's going to have? It'll make more availability. They will undercut the wealthy man. The wealthy man will be forced to they'll cause a price drop in the whole thing and a rush for everybody to buy seats. Beautiful, exactly what the shul needs, right? The wealthy man is like, excuse me? I was there for you when you needed me. I bought out all the seats. Not only that, I bought the seats on the expectation that there's X amount of space around them. I bought the seats as they were being presented in the shul. Now you're adding more seats into the shul. That means that now there's no access to my seats. You can, or whatever, less access, whatever it is. You see what's going on here? It's a fascinating case, no? The problem is Rav Yitzchak Bar Sheshes has nothing to base it on. The Rivash is like, I don't know. I don't know who's right. Can the shul add more seats, taking space in the wealthy man's wide aisles? Or does the wealthy man have a right to say, no, I bought these seats with a certain explanation. Sorry, you got to just suck it up. Right? And there's nowhere clearly in the Torah that this is addressed. Right? So what does Rav Yitzchak Bar Sheshes need to do? Topic of today's conversation. He needs some precedent. So he turns to the Talmud. All right? Let's read what the Talmud says. The Talmud is not going to be talking about seats. The Talmud is going to be talking about housing. Tova Jane, if you can read for us, please. Text 7, right of way, page 120.
Rav Huna says, if a resident of a lane wants to build a structure on the lane adjacent to their courtyard entrance, the other residents of the lane can prevent this because it will require them to circumvent the structure.
Okay, so you have a couple of guys, and by the way, this is the way houses were built in those days. Take a look at the image on the screen, you'll see it. So, where you see the horse and wagon cruising along, that's the main thoroughfare. Then there were things called mavoys, right? You see where you see the little children playing? That's called a mavoy. A mavoy is an alleyway or a lane, okay? That would come off of the main freeway, or thoroughfare. Most people would not be traveling in there with horse and wagons, but people would walk through there. Then what would open up from there were chatzeros. Chatzeros means courtyard. So you see where the adults are talking and the old man has the cane, right? They're in a mavoy in a chatzer. Off of that chatzer, you see multiple houses opening up to that chatzer. Yeah? Says the Talmud, if you want to build a bench in the middle of the chatzer, so where you see the A, perfectly allowed. Why? You build a bench over there, you're not blocking anybody's thoroughfare. It's right next to your house. You're going to sit there and you're going to watch the people go by. You're going to people watch it. You're going to watch the kids play Chamisha Avanim. Anybody know that Israeli game? Kugelach, where they play with it like jacks. It's like a Jewish version of jacks. Watch them play it outside in the courtyard and run around with a ball. Beautiful. These are much simpler times, obviously. They're not worried about pedophiles. They're not worried about, I don't know, all these other things. Like today, I wouldn't let my kids play anywhere besides for Chabad. Anyways. But okay, so you're allowed to build a bench there, no problem. What about in B? What about in the place where you see the B on the image? No, you're not allowed to build a bench there. You build a bench there, what happens? Even if you're not blocking the thoroughfare, you're making the thoroughfare narrower. And that doesn't belong only to you. That belongs to a whole bunch of people. That alleyway is not yours. You can't just build something there and block the thoroughfare. So therefore, you're not allowed to build there. Okay. So, in this case, one of the residents is deciding to install an object near the entrance to their courtyard, right? The problem is they have the right to do so with their home within the courtyard. They're not allowed to do this with the whole thoroughfare because you're blocking other people. The application to our case is obviously going to be clear. And if you say about Sheshet, the Rivash says that just like over there, he cannot build a bench to block all sorts of other people. The community, in this case, the shul, the people who are building the shul, have no right to diminish the access for the wealthy man towards his seat. Interesting. Now, I think all of us understand that the Rivash cannot end here, right? Why? Because the community could not allow the situation to continue as it was. And this is where we get to another bonus point to today's lesson. And we saw this already last week with the Nile River. A good rabbi's work also includes providing workable solutions that are consistent with Talmudic law. So just because he's telling them that they're not allowed doesn't mean he's going to end his answer. Sorry, the answer is no. No, the answer is no, but you could do this. And so the Rivash cites another Talmudic passage for a different precedent that would be allowed. Tova Jane, can you keep going? Power of the people.
Right. Of course, I was reading ahead. I will find it. I promise.
Text 8, page 122.
Okay. Residents of a city may establish local standards for measurement, product pricing, and wages, and impose fines for noncompliance.
Okay, so says the Rivash, says, listen, I see that you guys have an issue on your hand. The solution you came up with, which is diminishing his access and adding more seats, you're not allowed to do that. But you could price cap. A community is allowed to set caps on shul seat rentals. So why don't you do that? Why don't you say nobody is allowed to charge more than double the amount, whatever it is, for rent, for a seat. You bought the seat at $100 a seat, you're allowed to sell it up to $150 or up to $200, and you're not allowed to sell it for more than that. And most likely that's actually what they did. Okay, now, These two instances, the instance of the blood libel, and the instance of and whether they can impose a tax on the whole Holy Roman Empire Jewish community or whether only on the Regensburg Jewish community. Then the second instance of the shul seat speculator, right? Both these instances were cases where you see a rabbi applying what seems to be a totally different case from the Talmud to his case at hand. Okay, I'm going to pause now because I was waiting for a certain name. Yesterday, somebody that my brother-in-law's mother, Rabbi Meir Bornstein, is my brother-in-law, and he's a Chabad rabbi in Orange County, New York. And his mother passed away yesterday. I've been saying Mishaberach for her. For those of you that come to shul, you might have noticed I've been saying Mishaberach for Esther Mindel Basara. I wanted to know her father's name, but now that I found it out, so today's class is going to be. Hold on. Today's class is going to be dedicated in loving memory of Esther Mindel Bas Chaim David HaKohen. May her neshama have an aliyah. Her funeral is actually today, I think. And may her neshama have an aliyah. May she be a good tebetzer, a good intercessor on behalf of her entire family, and may we soon be reunited with her. With the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days. But for now, may this class be in her memory and for an aliyah for her neshama. Okay.
Amen.
Just wanted to say that because my sister just texted me. I didn't know the father. When you do a mishaberach for those in need of a speedy recovery, you do it based on the mother's name, and then when they pass away, everything is supposed to be done based on the father's name. So I was waiting for the father's name. Now that I got it, we put that in. Okay. Back to the topic of today's class. So we've had two cases so far. Yes. Both of those cases have been basically, there's been nothing new about the case. It's not like the technology or the world changed. It's just a new scenario that has never been dealt with in the Talmud or in the Torah. And now they needed to apply some other case from the Talmud and the Torah in order to be able to solve the dilemma. But now we are going to get to technological cases. What does that mean? It's not a new scenario, it's a new technology, it's a new reality in the world that never existed before. A new technology has been developed. And we are taught that everything that Hashem created in this world, including the human ability to develop ingenious new devices, and thus these devices themselves, exist for a positive purpose. So guided by this belief, Jews throughout the generations have embraced new technologies, using them to bring more godliness into the world, more goodness, using them as part of our mission statement as Jews in this world, which is to create a home for God in this world. At the same time, halacha doesn't change, so the halacha still exists and still encourages us and obligates us to decide in each situation what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. Okay, so if you take a moment, we're not going to go through all of these, but on page 120, starting on page 124 in figure 3.5, you see all different instances, and this is fascinating. Okay, when the hourglass came out, the first one, the astrolabe, we're going to do properly in just a moment. When the hourglass came out, when the spinning wheel came out, when the printing press came out, there was always questions. The printing press comes out. Question is, we know that there's a certain holiness to Torah, tefillin, mezuzot, parchments like that they have to be buried. Does that same thing apply to a printed piece of Jewish literature, right? Of Torah literature. Now today we know that is the case, and we know about Shemus and Geniza, but at the time it was new. It was brand new. Firearms, telescopes, umbrellas, right? Are you allowed to open an umbrella on Shabbos? Surprise, surprise. The answer is no, you're not allowed to. Isn't that crazy? But at the time, they had to figure it out right away. Inoculation, a vaccine, machinery, telegraphs, locomotives, electricity, photographs, hot air balloons. We're not going to go through all of them. Today, we're going to go through the astrolabe and the hot air balloon. But when you have time, perusing these few pages that they're giving you in the middle of the lesson should be a fascinating case. For today, we are going to ask a simple question. Is it permissible to use an astrolabe on Shabbat? Now, I know this is not new technology today, but at the end, I'll give some applications that this would apply to even today. But at the time, this was brand new technology. And text 9, they asked this question to Prépignan, which is an area in France, regarding your question, is it permitted to use an astrolabe on Shabbat? Right? Now, for the purposes of this community, of this Zoom, I think the first question we need to ask is, what on earth is an astrolabe? So let's turn our attention to the video screens. I'm going to play a short clip from a TED Talk where somebody's explaining what an astrolabe is, and he actually has one, and he's going to demonstrate it. So please turn your attention to the video screens.
What time is it? What time is it? If you glance at your iPhone, it's so simple to tell the time. But I'd like to ask you, how would you tell the time if you didn't have an iPhone? How would you tell the time, say, 600 years ago? How would you do it? Well, the way you would do it is by using a device that's called an astrolabe. So an astrolabe is relatively unknown in today's world, but at the time, in the 13th century, it was the gadget of the day. It was the world's first popular computer, and it was a device that, in fact, is a model of the sky. So the different parts of the astrolabe in this particular type, the rete corresponds to the position of the stars, the plate corresponds to a coordinate system, and the mater has some scales and puts it all together. If you were an educated child, you would know how to not only use the astrolabe, you would also know how to make an astrolabe. And we know this because the first treatise on the astrolabe, the first technical manual in the English language, was written by Geoffrey Chaucer. Yes, that Geoffrey Chaucer in 1391 to his little Lewis, his 11-year-old son. And in this book, little Lewis would know the big idea. And the central idea that makes this computer work is this thing called stereographic projection. And basically the concept is, how do you represent the three-dimensional image of the night sky that surrounds us onto a flat, portable two-dimensional surface? The idea is actually relatively simple. Imagine that the Earth is at the center of the universe, and surrounding it is the sky projected onto a sphere. Each point on the surface of the sphere is mapped through the bottom pole onto a flat surface where it's then recorded. So the North Star corresponds to the center of the device. The ecliptic, which is the path of the sun, moon, and planets, correspond to an offset circle. The bright stars correspond to little daggers on the rete, and the altitude corresponds to the plate system. Now, the real genius of the astrolabe is not just the projection. The real genius is that it brings together two coordinate systems so they fit perfectly. There's the position of the sun, moon, and planets on the movable rete, and then there's their location on the sky as seen from a certain latitude on the back plate. Okay? So how would you use this, this device? Well, let me first back up for a moment. This is an astrolabe. Pretty impressive, isn't it? And so this astrolabe is on loan from us from the Oxford School of Museum of History, and you can see the different components. This is the mater, the scales on the back. This is the rete. Okay, do you see that? That's the movable part of the sky. And in the back, you can see like a spider web pattern, and that spider web pattern corresponds to the local coordinates in the sky. This is a rule device, and on the back are some other devices, measuring tools, and scales to be able to make some calculations. Okay. You know, I've always wanted one of these. For my thesis, I actually built one of these out of paper. This is a replica from a 15th century device, and it's worth probably about 3 MacBook Pros. But a real one would cost about as much as my house, and the house next to it, and actually every house on the block, on both sides of the street, maybe a school thrown in, and some, you know, a church. They're just incredibly expensive.
Okay, so that's what an astrolabe is, all right? Now, for the purposes of our conversation, we have a simple question, text 9, it's on page 131. Regarding what is it permitted to use an astrolabe on Shabbat? Now, there's a few things that this rabbi is now going to need to do. He needs to, first of all, establish in his own mind which laws of Shabbat would the astrolabe be violating, okay? And the first one that he's going to go with, and the most important one, is going to be boneh. He's going to try and see, does this fit? Is this allowed, or is it permitted, or is it prohibited as per the laws and the rules of bona, which is the prohibition against building. So for those of you that are not familiar, the Talmud learns out from the Torah that there are 39 prohibited acts, prohibited forms of work that we're not allowed to do on Shabbat. These are called the Lamed Tet Melachot, and they're learned out from the Mishkan and the way that they built the Mishkan. Whatever they did in the Mishkan, we're not allowed to do on Shabbat. One of them is bona, obviously. They built the Mishkan, right? They built it, they assembled it, and then they disassembled it. Now, building does not necessarily need to be something that's going to be, like when we think of building, we think of like somebody who's laying bricks and putting mortar in between them. But the Mishkan was not. It was assemblable and disassemblable, right? But somehow the Mishkan is considered building, and there's a lighter form of building that we're going to see is not building. So this is where the Rivash, or Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Shesha, takes this. I'm sorry. We are now, that was the last one. This one is the Rashba. Rabbeinu Shlomo ben Aderet, so we're in the 1200s now with the Rashba. And text 10 is where he's going to be looking for precedent in Tractate Shabbat. Ron, if you can read it for us, please.
In the house of Rav Chama, there was a sectional bed which they would reassemble on the festivals. One of the sages said to him, "What is your reasoning to permit it?" He replied, "I agree with the opinion of Rabbam Shimon ben Gamliel, who said that if it is a loose fitting, it is permitted."
Ooh. So, turns out there's some very clear guidance in the Talmud as to what type of building would be allowed on Shabbat and what type of building would not be allowed on Shabbat. If you're building something like they built in the Mishkan, which is like a tight fitting, you're going to stick pegs into sockets, and it's going to stand there permanently, and it's going to be there for many, many days, many years, many months, whatever it is, that's not allowed. But something loose fitting, like it seems like an assemblable bed, which is what Rav Chama seems to have had in his head, in his house, a sectional bed of some sort that they would take apart because they didn't need it all year round, but on festivals when they had more guests, they would assemble it. And one time, I guess, they didn't assemble it before Shabbat, and he allowed them to assemble it on Shabbat. Why? Because the parts were loose-fitting. How is this going to apply to the astrolabe? Well, an astrolabe is certainly loose-fitting, right? You saw the man, well, we didn't see him take it apart, but in one of the screens, right, in one of his slides, we saw that he had 3 different pieces. You just kind of click them into place and you flip them together and you take them apart. And that's the way it's meant to be that way. They're meant to be loose fitting. So therefore he's going to say that it's going to be permissible to use it on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Now, so that's going to be our answer to the astrolabe, right? It doesn't require force to assemble it. So therefore it's going to be permitted to assemble it and use it on Shabbat. Question. Anybody on this Zoom own an astrolabe? No. What can you think of that you do own, or that you did own, or that you may own in today's day and age that would fit under this category, that actually this law and this application of the law would be applicable to you as well? Anybody? I have one right here. It's not a typical thing for somebody to have in their office, but I have one on the top shelf in my office. Anybody ever hear of a pack and play? You know what those are? It's like these little cribs that you assemble. You take them, they fold up. I have it up here in the corner because sometimes Leah comes to shul on Shabbos and she naps in my office. You take it, you assemble it. It's called a pack and play. You assemble it, and then you put like a little mattress down on the bottom, and then the kid sleeps in it. And when they're done, you pack it up and you fold it up and you put it back at the top shelf of your office. Well, assuming that you have your children sleep in your office, which I granted is rare, but in my case, that's the. Or are you allowed to assemble a pack and play on Shabbat? Well, we have some clear precedent here that you'd be allowed to. Why? It's loose fitting. It comes apart and goes back over and over again over a Shabbat. So then you're allowed to do it, right? What about Lego? Anybody? Are you allowed to assemble Lego on Shabbat?
That's creating something.
Forget the creating something, because now you're starting to get into more philosophical ideas. Just a simple parallel halachic application here.
I think it would be permissible.
Is Lego loose fitting, or is Lego does Lego require force or not?
I don't think so. I think it's in the category of play. It's not really
The
building
play,
something.
okay, but now you're applying your own ideas here. Play or creating something. Those are all great ideas, but that's not what we're looking to do here. We're not looking for new ideas. We're looking just to apply what the Talmud says about other things and then apply it to our case. Now, as it so happens, it's a huge discussion among the Talmudic, among contemporary halachic decisors. Lego came out 50 years ago, 80 years ago, whatever it is, and ever since it's been a big discussion about it. And for the most part, today people say that adults should avoid playing with Lego on Shabbos, but children can, and they should be made aware that it's building. It's because it's not real building, therefore we're allowing them to do it on Shabbat. But that once they're over bar mitzvah, they shouldn't do it anymore. Isn't this fascinating? Anyways, these are some examples of things like this. What are some modern examples of putting things together that don't constitute bona because the assemblage is loose? This becomes the halachic terminology based on this responsive. It's called rafui. Putting on a lampshade, placing a toilet paper roller into its grooves, putting in a soda stream capsule. Anybody know what a soda stream capsule is? Right? When those seltzer makers, right? All of these things are allowed. Why? Because they're considered rafui. They're considered like loose, right? But when something is a forced connection, so then you're not allowed to. Okay. I promised we would also do a hot air balloon, yeah? Let's do one more. What could possibly be the issue with a hot air balloon? Well, turns out that on Sukkot, you can end up with an issue with a hot air balloon. Hot air balloons tend to float and to hover, and a sukkah has to be built under the sky, right? So what if somebody builds their sukkah, beautiful, nice sukkah, but they happen to live in where? Palm Springs? Where is it? Joshua Tree? Where is it that they have all the hot air balloons? Somewhere out there. You see them when you drive that direction, east of us, or in New Mexico, where they have all the competitions, etc. And he builds his sukkah, and then he's about to sit down to his Sukkot dinner. He looks up, and some dude in a hot air balloon is hovering right above his sukkah. He's stuck. What are you gonna do? Now, I don't think they had hot air balloons in the times of the Talmud. So now the rabbi is stuck. What should he answer? He's going to have to rely on precedent or analog in order to try and apply something else to the hot air balloon, right? And it turns out
these Talmud things about the sukkah on the elephant and the sukkah on the boat and the
very good. And what else? The sukkah on the other sukkah on the boat. But what about a hot air balloon? It doesn't have a hot air balloon.
No, but
turns out it has something close enough.
A sukkah on the elephant, I remember.
Yeah, but it turns out it has something close enough for Rabbi Moshe Perlmutter. This question was addressed to Rabbi Moshe Perlmutter. Ron, if you can read it for us, please. It's text 11 on page 133, a new matter.
Our teacher, Rabbi Shalom Mordecai HaKohen, chief judge of the community of
Berezhany,
live and be well. I've been struck by a new matter that has never arisen before. Inventors have recently brought into reality the ability to soar in a hot air balloon. Humans control it so that if they want to remain stationary at a high altitude, they can do so, remaining there even when there are strong winds. The hot air balloon is large in both length and width. What is the halakhic status of a sukkah if a hot air balloon is seen hovering directly above it? Might this render the sukkah invalid?
Fascinating stuff from the 1800s. I mean, I think planes are already invented, but they're not really, planes are not really a thing. But hot air balloons apparently are a thing, right? And this guy wants to know. But I love this line. I've been struck by a new matter that has never arisen before. This is what we're talking about in today's lesson. Rabbis all the time are struck by new matters that have never been arisen before. How do they deal with it? He's going to try to figure out precedent. So he turns to the Gemara, and the precedent that he finds is the flying tent. What's the flying tent? The flying tent is about a very similar issue to Sukkah. It's about Tumah. Tumah is ritual impurity, right? Now, as many of you know, you're not allowed to touch a dead body. You touch a dead body, you become impure. What about if you don't touch the dead body? The dead body is just sitting next to you. So then it depends. If you're outside, you're in the clear, you're fine. The dead body is 10 feet ahead of you. You're standing here, you're not touching it, you're not... Beautiful, you're good to go. right? You're not touching it, you're not moving it, you're not sitting on it. Okay, beautiful. What about if there's a roof over you? So then it turns out there's something called Mevin Esatuma. If you and the dead body are under the same roof, so then the ritual impurity comes to you as well, right? It gets dragged to you as well. When discussing these laws in a Mishnah, in Ohalot, the Talmud, the Mishnah brings up a very interesting fact. Elise, can you read it for us, please? Page 134.
Okay. The following do not bring impurity: a flying cloak and a ship floating on the water. However, if the ship is tied with something that keeps it steady, or a stone is on the cloak holding part of it down, they can bring impurity.
So this is interesting. If you are standing on land and there's a dead body 3 feet next to you, and then a flying cloak goes, a flying magic carpet goes right over you. Okay, maybe it's not magic, but it's just being carried by the wind. And for a brief moment, it goes over you and the dead body. Are you now ritually impure? Or, same instance, just underwater. You're scuba diving or swimming underwater. And all of a sudden you notice a dead corpse floating right ahead of you, 2 feet from you. Now, I can ask why you're swimming with dead corpses. I'm not asking that because I don't want to know the answer, right? But a ship goes right above you and covers both you at the same time. Are you all of a sudden impure because this acted as a roof over the two of you, over you and the dead body, or whatever other ritual impurity it was? The answer is no, unless it is anchored to the ground. So let's say this cloak or this tent or whatever it is also tied down on one end. So it's flying in the air, it's covering you and the dead body, but it's also tied down on one side. Then it's considered a roof. Or if this boat has an anchor launched, right? So it's over you, it's over the dead body, but it's also anchored down with an anchor. So then it's considered a roof. Says this rabbi in this shut, he says maybe this applies also to a sukkah. Let's see how he applies it. I forget who's reading now. I think Steve, text 13, the ruling.
Okay. To the Honorable Rabbi and Scholar, Rabbi Moshe Perlmutter, the Rabbi of Lodz, live and be well. Due to Cholamoid, I will be brief and respond succinctly, as explained in Chapter 8 of Mishnah
That's the one we just quoted.
A ship floating on water and a flying cloak do not bring impurity. This is true even if they are stationary, as noted by the commentaries. Only
So
when
the ship could be hovering. That's the key here. Or the cloak could be hovering somehow above you and the dead body. If it's not anchored, it doesn't count. Go ahead.
Only when the ship is tethered to land, and only when a stone is placed on the edge of the cloak does it qualify as a tent. Accordingly, in our case, the hot air balloon is not considered a tent and does not invalidate the sukkah beneath it.
So that's that. What is the ruling? No. A hot air balloon floating, and we can apply that to an airplane as well. We can apply that to a helicopter. No matter what you want, they can be floating above your sukkah, and you're in the clear. Why? Because they're not anchored to the ground, right? Now, if it's a blimp and it is anchored to the ground, maybe on one side or the other side, and then it's above your sukkah, that is an issue, right? So now we know how to answer this question. This is some fascinating stuff because these are new technologies, but they're new technologies and new problems, but we're applying ancient Torah to it in a very real and very applicable way. Now, how does this work? Can anybody do this? Any rabbi can do this. What they would need to do, though, is they would need to back up exactly why they're saying this. Bring the case from the Talmud, bring the commentary on that case, bring the rulings on that case, and then explain why you think that applies to your case, and then apply it. After that, Hashem does the rest. As we said, Hashem imo, God will guide you so that you make the right decision. But if you are well-intentioned and you're trying to apply precedent properly, you're looking to the Torah, you're not using your own intuitions. By the way, I want to point this out, even at the risk of offending some people on this group. Sometimes when I asked for answers to questions, people started to go to very good directions from their own brain. I feel like this because this guy's being a jerk. I feel that this is a good idea. Why? Because, I don't know, for whatever reason. Even if you have good reasons, if they're not based on the Torah or on the Talmud, and you're not applying our Torah, that's not a rabbi's job. Sometimes that is a rabbi's job. Somebody asks, Rabbi, what do you advise? What's your counsel? What do you feel? That's one type of question. But when somebody asks for a halachic decision, they're asking for you to apply the ancient Torah to their situation. And for that, you're going to need to back it up with a system of halacha, which we've been unpacking in this course. I'd like to conclude. One second, Steve, we're running low on time, so I'm just going to conclude here, and then you're welcome to hang around for more questions. At first glance, everything we've been discussing in today's lesson about precedent, etc., seems like it's a very technical issue, purely technical. There's no clear answer in earlier books. We need to figure it out on our own, using our comparative skills. This is how we do it. You find the case, you apply it, beautiful. But in truth, I think there's something much deeper that we've been discussing over the last 88 minutes, and that we're wrapping up now. And once we understand that, I think we'll see that it's not just a rabbi's job, it's actually something that every single one of us is obligated to be a part of. Let's take a step back. Last week, we closed with a very powerful medrash. Before the Torah was given, there was an unbridgeable gap between the spiritual, the world of the spirit, the spiritual, and the world of the physical. If someone wanted to be holy, he had to leave this world behind. Holiness existed only up there, while mundane human lives were lived down here. But then when Hashem gave us the Torah, Hashem broke that barrier. He bridged that gap between what was the world of the spiritual and the world of the physical. And one of the ways that we become partners with Hashem in creation is by us helping him destroy that barrier. By us actually bridging the gap between the human mind, which is physical in nature, and Torah law, which is godly in nature. And this approach, this business of blending a godly Torah, I keep calling it an ancient Torah. It's not just that it's ancient, it's godly, it's infinite. And our physical and human minds and our limited and finite minds, bridging the gap between those two is actually part of what we're supposed to be accomplishing here in this world. Ron, if you can bring this home for us with text 14 from the famous Tanya of the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Hasidism, on page 138. Go ahead.
Every one of us can reveal secrets of wisdom, to reveal and to innovate new insights in halakha, agada, the revealed dimensions of the Torah and the Kabbalistic sphere. Indeed, we are obliged to do so to perfect our souls.
Says the Alter Rebbe in Tanya. You know how we always say that the purpose of creation was to create a home for God down here in this world? And what is Ron Rohr's job? It is to create a home for God in his small portion of the world, in his mind, in his life, in his sphere of influence. And that's the same for every single one of us. He says that also applies to your brain. Your brain and the Torah, your job is to meld the two, to fuse the two, until God's Torah actually becomes part of your brain, and your brain is trying to apply God's Torah. And when we do this, the topic of today's lesson, when we figure out ways to use precedent in practice, to actually apply the Torah to whether it's new technologies, new scenarios, or just to our lives, we are actually accomplishing this. And with this, we will conclude today's lesson, which has been precedent in practice. Please turn your attention to the video screens for a summary of today's lesson.
Lesson 3. Precedent in Practice. 1. Moses' decision to break the tablets was an act of halachic reasoning by analogy, and God affirmed his conclusion. This set a precedent for rabbinic decision-making. Rabbis applying existing Torah principles when facing new questions and winning divine approval. 2. Whether it was Rabbi Yosef Colon's bold ruling obligating all communities to help free the Regensburg prisoners, or Rabbi Yitzhak Bar Sheshet's nuanced handling of a synagogue seat shortage in Shativa, the Responsa literature shows how rabbis applied existing Talmudic law to unique and unexpected situations. 3. Halachic rulings don't exist in a vacuum. Rabbi Yosef Colon's decision wasn't just a legal interpretation, it was informed by a sharp reading of the anti-Semitic climate of his time. 4. Judaism sees human innovation as part of the divine plan, meant to be harnessed for goodness and holiness. But the emergence of the new, from the astrolabe during the Middle Ages,
to the hot air balloon in modern times often raises new halachic questions. Rabbis have historically met these advances with a commitment to applying timeless principles to modern developments. 5. When we apply Torah law to new realities, we forge a sacred and profound bond between the human mind and God's will. 6. Every Jew is called upon to apply the Torah to new realities. While practical rulings are reserved for qualified experts, engaging in this process in a conceptual manner deepens our relationship with the Torah and with God.
Thank you all for joining us for Lesson 3 this week. This has been Precedent in Practice. And I look forward to seeing you all next week for Lesson 4, which is called Counterweights Considered, when we are going to talk about the push and pull within halachic decisions.
Oh, good.
Okay, I promise to be quick.